I'm sorry. That's fine. We'll call this meeting of the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. This agenda was posted in the office of the county clerk on the 17th day of September 2021. Notice was sent to the West Bend Daily News, Express News, WIBD, WMBZ Radio, WTKM Radio, My Community Now, Hartford Times Press, Kewaskum Statesman, and the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Notice that all the supervisors are here, including Mr. Krebs, Mr. Strump. But Mr. Krebs, we understand is probably on his way in, or we're not aware that he's going to be dialing into us. Stand please for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now, we've got a couple situations here this morning. We're going to make a little bit of deviation in the agenda. We're going to proceed with the public hearing. And then right after that, our county Register of Deeds, Ms. Martin has an obligation to get to. She's making a presentation, I believe, over in Wisconsin Dells this morning. So then once we get through the public hearing, we're going to do a very quick session on the budget regarding the Register of Deeds office. And then we're going to go back to the consent agenda and then continue with the rest of the agenda. Yes, ma'am.
Just to clarify, both of the action items, the public hearing, conditional use with Kevin Zimmer, and then the following subdivision approval is the same applicant. And they are actually here today in the audience. So if we could just get those taken care of, then we can move on to the discussion items. So I think you said that, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, we're going to go with the public hearing action items first.
Yep. So A and B.
A and B, yes.
Okay,
And then
thank
we're
you.
going to come back. So,
Yep.
all right. All right, then we'll move to the public hearing part of the agenda on the matter of a conditional use permit, GCAM LLC, care of Kevin Zimmer, Town of Trenton. Will the clerk please read the public notice?
Notice is hereby given that a public hearing will be held at a meeting of the Washington County Land Use and Planning Committee in room 1019 of the Washington County Government Center, 432 East Washington Street, West Bend, Wisconsin, on Thursday, September 23rd, 2021 at 7:30 a.m. There will be heard and considered the petition of GCAM LLC, care of Kevin Zimmer, for a conditional use permit for associated filling, grading, and excavating of greater than 15,000 square feet within 300 feet of the ordinary high water mark of a stream for invasive species removal, land clearing, and installing driveways in a shoreland, wetland, and floodplain zoning district. Part of the northeast quarter, northwest quarter of Section 2, Town of Barton, T2 0029, dated this 30th day of August, 2021.
The hearing is now open. Are there any comments or suggestions or questions, sir? Mr. Siebel.
I was just gonna give just a quick overview. This is an application for an after the fact permit. This CSM, you've actually seen this, the certified survey map for development of the lots. At your last meeting on the 8th, and Jody corrected the 8th, 9th date that was actually in the report. There's still additional work to do. He wants to do some additional clearing on, and if you look in the map, there's some buffers and stuff, clearing zones that he wants to actually get down to the stream on the lots to the left. They're actually in yellow. The work on the right was done, and also some filling and stuff along the road and the installation of the driveways. I know there's probably outstanding issues at the town of Barton, which I know they were asked that the driveways be taken out of the right of way until the CSM was created and adopted by them. So whatever they have to do to satisfy the town of Barton requirements. But yeah, they're through this, if they're approved, they'll have the ability to do all the grading and stuff, whatever they need.
Any other comments or questions from the gallery? Hearing no other comments, or are there any other comments? I'm sorry, am I missing a procedural thing? All right, so we closed the hearing. All right. I pronounce the hearing is closed, and request a motion and second to bring to the item to the floor for discussion. Are there any comments or questions from the committee members?
To approve.
Mr. Gallows? Ms. Schulteis? We have a motion and a second from Mr. Gallows and Ms. Schulteis. Any comments or questions from the audience? Mr. Sebo?
So the one thing I would point out in the action, the recommended motion, is that the additional clearing zones that are being asked to do with the 3 lots to the left that are in yellow on the map, is that the invasive species and the brush removal is all just a cut, not any rubbing and clearing of the stumps. So they can cut and actually treat the stumps for the invasive species, because there's a lot of buckthorn and stuff through there. So just that your action and your recommended motion also includes that, what's in the report.
And we have every faith to believe that these actions will be taken properly. I mean, the requirements that we're putting into this.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Gallows.
A little bit of carry off on the chair's question, since this is the after fact, has the developer did not know or understand needed to get a permit? And, will there be other enforcement visits, or what are we going to do to ensure that we're complying?
Kevin Zimmer, the developer. I misinterpreted the website on the WDNR invasive species removal. I wasn't familiar with the 15,000 square foot and the actual pulling of the roots versus cutting. And Paul and I have been working close together to rectify and educate me.
So will your office do any other visits? I mean, you caught this because of a site visit. Will
Right.
there be additional site visits?
Yeah, as part of the requirements is when he wants to start doing the work, he contacts our office to let us know he's going to be in there doing the work, and then we'll be out there doing site visits.
Okay. Last question. I also noticed in the application, there was a fee, but there was no penalty or forfeiture. Isn't there typically some kind of penalty for after the facts?
It's double the permit fee.
Okay.
So the fee that was paid is double the.
Oh, it was double.
Yes, yep,
So the 950 is double.
right.
Got it. Thank you.
Are there any more questions or comments from the committee? Hearing none, then we'll vote on the matter of approving the conditional use permit as requested. All in favor, say aye. Sure.
Sorry, just to make it clear, Mr. Sebo's recommendation for the no, just grinding, I think you called it?
Cutting and treatment of the stumps.
Correct. Was that captured? Great, thank you.
Any opposed? Then the item passes. Now do we go to another second public hearing? Action item B is not. All right, then let's proceed with action item number B, or action item B, the approving authority with the town of Polk preliminary plat for Cedar Creek Estate subdivision. I'll entertain a motion for discussion on this. I'm going to entertain a motion so we can have discussion on this. Supervisor Schulteis.
Second.
Supervisor Boltman, all right. Comments or questions or an explanation on this, please? This is the preliminary plat for Cedar Creek Estate subdivision.
No presentation or anything, but if anyone has questions, I can answer them.
Any questions from the committee? Mr. Gallows.
So I see that and this is typical of others, erosion control and stormwater management plans. So is there any other approvals that are needed for the stormwater management plan?
No, if you have any questions about that specific plan, Paul Sebo can answer them, but they have been approved by our land resources
Okay.
department.
No questions?
Hearing no other questions, then I call for a vote, please, to approve as the approving authority, the preliminary plat for Cedar Creek Estate subdivision. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Now, we're gonna move, as we stated earlier, we're gonna move on to the agenda. We're gonna have a very quick budget discussion regarding the Register of Deeds office. And we're doing this because Ms. Martin has to leave. We just want to cover any questions regarding the budget presentations for the Register of Deeds office. Then we'll go back to the consent agenda.
Morning, everyone. I just wanted to hit a couple of the high points on the ROD's budget. There were some favorable expenditure changes here. There was some health insurance changes. So employees, when they switch from like family to single or family to no plan at all, it actually drives some cost savings in the budget. So some of that is in here. But the big story really is there's a revenue increase being budgeted here of just over $100,000 in this budget. If you look the property tax levy number, at the very bottom of the financial chart, it actually shows a negative amount. It's in parentheses. That means actually that the department takes in more revenue than cost, and actually helps to offset tax levy for the whole county overall. We're budgeting $100,000 revenue increase here. Largely that's due to the real estate market, where that's at right now. That's a big revenue driver for the department. We're obviously going to keep an eye on this for changing trends in the market and things like that. But really, I think, we think this is pretty reasonable to make this change. Revenues that we're budgeting for 2022, we're actually budgeting those roughly where we finished 2019. So that very top line, if you scan all the way over even the 2020 actual, where our budget is actually even lower than that. And so we think that's a good conservative revenue estimate, and we're hoping that, like I said, we're going to keep an eye on the market and on the revenue line. But other than that, I don't really have much else on this budget. So unless Sharon had anything to add, but no. Okay.
Any comments or questions from the committee regarding the county clerk's office? I'm sorry, the Register of Deeds office budget. Hearing none? Yes, Mr. Gellens.
Yeah, I think I would agree with there with sanitary sewer permits up and just coming before this board with other development. That seems very reasonable, that $1 million.
100,000.
Or sorry,
Yeah.
100, yes, one less zero. Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to make sure everyone's awake.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Before we actually move on to now we'll go to the consent agenda. Before we actually move on to that, I've got a couple questions. Perhaps it can't get answered. Mr. Siebel has left now. Just a couple. Oh, Paul, you're still, I'm sorry. Comment or question regarding the changes coming to the shoreline wetland floodplain code. Is this expected to be an extensive document when we see it? And when do we expect a public hearing? And will that happen here as a body, or will it be something different for a public hearing?
So not extensive changes. Most of it is just identifying the maps that are updated through FEMA. There will be minor code language changes just to be able to match the DNR's kind of requirements, and they've changed their model a little bit. So we're working through that right now. The public hearing will be here as part of this meeting. A year and a half ago, we had a big public presentation at the Fair Park regarding this floodplain study. So we've had a ton of outreach already. So it's just going to be a matter of coming through this committee and then taking it to county board.
Any idea when that might happen?
Hopefully sooner than later. We pretty much have the code redrafted. It has to go to the DNR. They have to review and approve it before we can bring it here, and then the public hearing notice. So definitely looking at probably November and December.
November,
here in
December.
December at county board.
All right, very good. Thank you. Mr. Gallants.
Actually, a follow-up question to that. You had mentioned no material rule code changes, et cetera. So we're pretty much adopting what the DNR dictates or is recommending?
What we're required to adopt if we want to keep the flood insurance.
Okay.
For people, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. A couple of the comments quickly, then we'll continue moving on. I think everyone probably saw West Bend News yesterday, Washington County Golf Course praised in Sports Illustrated. If you haven't gotten a copy, it was a very complimentary article. And a personal note, I played there recently, and quite frankly, the golf course was in excellent condition. It played one of the best rounds I've ever had, but that doesn't mean it was a good score. Went out to Glacier Hills Park a couple weeks ago with Logan and Crystal out there, and I want to congratulate them on what they're doing out there at the park. If you haven't been out there, please go out and look at the cabins they're setting up, the small family cabins. They're very unique, very interesting, and extremely well done. And I can understand why we have a high occupancy rate on those. And I just want to say congratulations to all of them. And the R Beach expansion was done very masterfully. I think it looks beautiful. For those of you who have not been out there, please go take a look at it. It's massively expanded. And the day we had the ceremony out there last month, it was a good crowd. Maybe eventually we'll have a situation with parking where we need more parking. But that'd be a nice problem to have when it comes. The only other comment out there that day, we seem to be missing some trash containers, but I'm sure that's all been taken care of since then. So that's it. I have no other comments regarding the consent agenda. Does any committee members have anything to say? If not, then we'll entertain a motion and second to approve the agenda as presented. Mr. Boltman? Ms. Schultes. All right. That moves us to our county executive, Mr. Showman. You're up, sir. See that? Nicely written.
Do you want me to go over to that one? Would that be easier?
Yes.
Okay.
We did. Mary, did we actually vote on the consent agenda? Did I just ask for a vote? Motion and second. All in favor, say aye. All right, there we go. Thank you.
You have that presentation. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present to you today. I wanted to give this presentation to you as a little bit of a forecast of what some of the discussions that we're going to have in the next few weeks. And it's a follow-up really to the presentations and discussions that we have had in the past at my State of the County address that I've given to the county board. And now that I'm giving to municipalities across Washington County, every village and city in the county by October 4th will have had the presentation with the exception of the village of Newburgh. And I hope by the end of the year that I'm able to go to every town and Newburgh included, as well as the village of Richfield. So if you will just follow along with me in the presentation, I'll take you back to 2020 and late 2019 as I was running for county executive. One of the themes of my campaign was manage growth so it doesn't manage us. And really that's what our great community kind of stems from. The entire philosophy revolves around what does that look like in the last decade? Some of you probably remember what it looked like the decade before that. But we'll talk about the past decade and the decade to come and what I think that means for Washington County. Most of you have been here as we have worked our way through the vision, mission, and values of Washington County government, running the organization very well. I think there's been a massive transformation that has happened over the course of the last 8 years. This is really about a vision that kind of transcends the county government organization vision. And this is about the county as a community, the people, if you will, as you remember from presentations and discussions in the past, focusing on the people. And it really starts with kind of looking at the data, and I'll draw your attention to one data point. By now, most of you have probably heard the phrase the silver tsunami. We've talked about it in administration and in human resources for really the better part of 2 decades. And it's this concept of the baby boomers are going to leave the workforce in droves. And when they do, it's going to create all kinds of challenges for organizations worldwide. And it's going to create challenges for communities worldwide. And what the data shows is that that's started happening in earnest. I referenced there a study, a white paper from a group called EMSI, the Demographic Drought. And they term this as a SANSdemic, since obviously we're in the midst of a pandemic, everybody's used to that, but a SANSdemic is an absence of people. And really what this drives to is this data point on your slide that 3 million baby boomers retired in 2020 alone. And you think to yourself, well, it was COVID, it was a rough year. It probably exacerbated things. Well, it's true that it did, but in 2019 and in 2018, 2 million baby boomers retired. And basically what they're looking at with COVID is it was really just an accelerant to what was already coming. And so they expect in 2021 and 2022, and we're going to see that same type of retirement boom. And then ultimately that'll continue until that generation is out of the workforce. And that's reflective of the fact that millennials have actually taken over as the largest generation in the workforce today. So my generation, though I am the oldest of that generation, is now the largest population in the workforce right now. So we've got a massive problem as a nation, and quite frankly, across the globe, this is an issue. But here in Washington County, it's particularly acute. And what I mean by that is in Washington County, our 60 and older population is actually 20% higher than the average of the entire nation. And it's 10% higher than the state of Wisconsin as a whole. So this is a problem for everybody, but it's especially a problem for us. Because across the country, that 3 million represents about 1% of the population, actually just under 1% of the population. But in Washington County, it represents over 1%, probably closer to 1.1 or 1.2% of the population a year. So if you look back at the last decade and you think about what does managing growth mean, I give you a couple of examples. Now, fortunately, we have the most accurate census data possible. 2020 census data tells us that Washington County grew 3.7% from 2010 to 2020. And if you look at it kind of in a more micro, the city of West Bend, the largest community in Washington County by population, they grew at about a pace of 1.7% over that 10-year period. Now you got to remember this is 10 years, so you got to divide that by 10 to contemplate that one every year or the annual growth. If we're losing 1% of our population to retirement a year, in the city of West Bend, we're only growing by 0.17% per year. We've got a problem. And of course, Washington County is 0.37% per year. So that's not even half of what we need. And if Washington County is retiring people at closer to 1.2% per year, it's about a third of what we need just to keep pace with retirements. Now you project this out the next 10 or 20 years, knowing that baby boomers, the oldest right now, are about 75 years old. Everybody knows what 10 years from now will bring and 20 years from now will bring. And you really start to think about, man, we're going to have some real demographic challenges here in Washington County and nation and worldwide in the next 2 decades. So as you can see, the pace of growth just isn't keeping up with the demand that we've created because of the population challenges. So what does managing growth mean for the next decade? Simply stated, I think it comes down to we need to bring our kids home. We do a really poor job of bringing our kids home in Washington County, and we need to do a hell of a lot better job at that. And I'll talk in a few minutes about what I think it's going to take for that to be able to happen. But I think that's got to be our number one priority for the next decade and beyond. We graduate about 2,000 students per year on the high end. So 1,800 to 2,000 students in Washington County graduate from our high schools every single year. There isn't really very good data on where they go, because once the high schools and school districts get them out into wherever they're going, they kind of wash their hands and focus on the next cohort of kids. But the little bit we do know, about 50% of them, depending on the school district, are leaving for college after graduation. Another 10 to 25% are leaving for the military or to go find who they are somewhere across the globe. And then about 25% we think are sticking around and trying to figure out what they want to do for the rest of their lives in a career. Well, if you think about that 2000 number and you assume 25% of 2000, you're talking about 500 kids per year. Whereas we need to keep about 1,500 just to keep pace. So I think it's not unrealistic for us to say and to set a goal of let's just hit 50% a year and hope they marry a guy or girl from Waukesha or Fond du Lac County and bring them with them just to keep that pace of 1,000 to 1,500 in new population. So I think that's got to be our number one goal in the next decade or two, is finding ways to create paths for our kids to come home. But secondly, I think we need to do a lot better job of integrating people into our community, because we want people certainly to come from Milwaukee and Waukesha and Kansas City, Missouri, and all those other places. But it's really hard to break into Washington County once you're here, and we can do a better job of that. You've probably heard the term Bender for people who are from West Bend, but even people who've been here for 30 years aren't from here. And if you're not from here, you're reminded of that quite frequently. So we certainly can do a better job of integrating people in, welcoming them, easy for me to say, welcoming them through civic organizations and churches, nonprofit organizations, and helping them become part of and building community. Because I think one of the things that Washington County's got going for it, better than any of our neighbors, in my humble opinion, is that we have very strong sense of community. And what I mean by that is when times are tough, and every individual and every family has those tough times, they don't go to the government to solve their problem. It's the community that comes around them, envelops them, and helps through those times. You think of families like the Pearson family in Slinger. Most of you have probably heard that story by now. Both parents pass away very young, 3 children, and the whole community comes around them. Certainly families stepped up, but you're talking nonprofit organizations, you're talking about churches, even the community itself. The village president in Slinger led the way in many ways. It's really inspiring, and it's something that's special here in Washington County that we've got to do a better job of including everybody in that. So when you look at this data and you think about that sense of community, building social capital as it's termed, Washington County has a distinct advantage. We're a step ahead. The goal is, how do we stay 2 steps ahead and keep 2 steps ahead of everybody else? When you look at the demographic data, the number one takeaway that comes from this demographic drought white paper, and I'd encourage you to Google that document. All you have to do is type in the demographic drought MZ and you'll find it. But basically the number one takeaway is, over the course of the next 2 or 3 decades, the places that simply retain their people are going to win the prosperity game. And Washington County has been an extraordinarily prosperous county for 150 years. And if the data holds where it is today, and our population begins to decline, which it will right around 2050, we're going to start losing that game for the first time in generations. So all we have to do is keep our kids, and that's all I'm asking as part of this vision. So I won't read the vision to you, but it really starts to drill down to what I talked about a moment ago, and that is growing with our own kids and building trusting networks and social capital for the people who are here, both our children, who I think know better than anybody what our values are, what our character is, what it means to be from Washington County, kind of the Washington County way, if you will. And then as we bring other people in, helping instruct them in what that means, building virtue, building the character that we are, and helping them become part of those trusting networks and holding those common values. The 3 principles are outlined there. I think this is exactly what Washington County is all about. Having knocked well over 5,000 doors myself and talked to tens of thousands of people in Washington County, I think this is really representative of what we want to keep and thrive over the course of the next several decades and the next generation. What we're really talking about systematically is creating this virtual cycle of prosperity, which we've done for generations upon generations in Washington County. It really started with strong families. I mean, you don't have to go far. There's names sitting on this Diaz that are generational. And it's what made Washington County strong. Those families come together 150 years ago when times got tough. And as we grow, it's taking that and replicating it with names that aren't the same. But it's always been about building prosperity for the next generation. Long before my time here at Washington County, I'll say our forefathers, although it wasn't terribly long ago, created an organization called EDWC. And they created what eventually now has become the revolving loan fund to build up prosperous businesses. And they've done a phenomenal job of it. We've got some really strong industry here in Washington County. And it's that type of strong business that ultimately can provide for prosperous lives for people. If you don't have strong industry, you don't have strong downtowns. If you don't have strong industry, you don't have strong families and the homes that can sustain those families. And if that doesn't exist, it's almost impossible to have a strong community because the dollars and the strong families don't exist to provide those trusting networks and common values that I talked about a moment ago. So it's really about creating this virtual cycle of prosperity that ultimately benefits all of us. And that's what I'm asking for us to contemplate and create for the next generation. We have a little handout that I'll give you in just a moment that kind of touches on these 4 areas. On that handout, there's 4 separate areas, but I consolidate workforce and education for the purposes of this presentation. And I think these are the 3 areas that we really need to work towards to take a vision, kind of the abstract, and make it into a reality. We have, as I said, 18 to 2,000 students every year that graduate from Washington County high schools. What we don't do a great job at, and every superintendent that I've talked to will admit to this, what we don't do a great job at is creating a pipeline for those kids to go from those schools into our workforce, whether it's the trades, whether it's agriculture, whether it's manufacturing, and even places like West Bend Mutual and Delta Defense. There isn't a clear line from those schools into the doors of those different types of workforce. And so we need to do a better job of creating that pipeline and helping. There's been a number of initiatives that have been tried. In government, we affectionately refer to workforce as the black hole of government because when times are tough, when we get into recessionary times, workforce gets flooded with money. We retool people in their trades. We try to help them in the midst of crisis. And then when times are good again, the money completely evaporates and we kind of look around going, well, what are we going to do? And generally speaking, we're waiting for the next crisis. This is about developing a long-term strategy that doesn't wait for a crisis, but begins now in cultivating our children for generations to come. That's fully admitting that there will need to be more short-term strategies because you don't have to go far in every industry, including here at the county. We had a presentation last night, the Health and Human Services Committee, about how Samaritan can't find CNAs and RNs in particular. But everybody's got this. Businesses close for a period of time, maybe Mondays at the restaurants close because they can't find people. Manufacturing facilities, Hartford Industrial Park alone has 800 vacancies. Last time I talked to them, every industry has this problem, so that we'll need short-term strategies too. But I don't think that does us as much good as building that long-term strategy, and that's what this discussion and this vision is all about. Social capital is all of what I talked about before, those trusting networks and common values. And I just want to give you one, for instance. Some of you probably know the name Jack Rettler. Jack was an intern here in Washington County multiple times, actually worked for myself and Jamie Ludovic, for Brad Stern for a little period of time. Jack is a graduate of West Bend West High School. His dad, Pete, works for Moraine Park Technical College, is originally from Hartford in the agriculture industry, grew up as a kid. Jack earned a law degree from Marquette, undergraduate degree from La Crosse, super smart kid, probably should be working at Foley and Lardner if he wanted to do that. But fortunately, we had someone, Craig Sedonico, former mayor of West Bend, who reached out to Jack, encouraged him to move back to West Bend, helped him find a job at Madden Law Group, helped him eventually find a house here in town. And now Jack brought a girl from out of the county, way up northern Wisconsin. They are married. They bought a house here in West Bend, and now they have a child and are growing their family right here in Washington County. Now, that's a special circumstance, no doubt. Somebody who's really integrated into the community. But we need to create 1,500 more Jacks every single year. Everybody should have that same opportunity, and that's what this is about. And it takes that kind of network, that kind of social capital to be able to make this work. And I think we have an opportunity as a community to enhance that. The first initiative that I think we need to start with in this regard is next generation housing. Because when you take a step back and you think about why are our kids not moving here, one of the biggest hurdles I hear over and over, and I've toured a number of manufacturing facilities and I've talked to a lot of young people, one of the first hurdles I hear about is there's nowhere that I can afford to live in this county. So I want you to think for just a moment before you jump off the deep end. Think for just a moment about the very first job you had, not the newspaper route when you're a 12-year-old kid, but the first career type job you had. How much did you make? How much was the first single family house you bought? How many square feet was it? Now with that image in your mind's eye, think about what exists today for a 25-year-old kid coming out of college who wants to be a teacher. Think about the median income of Washington County today. You're talking about, for an individual, it's about $40,000 a year. That's about $20 an hour. Those are brand new teachers. Those are good paying jobs in our industries, Menasha Packaging, Quad Graphics, Carry Ingredients. They're all right in that bailiwick. The household income then would be $80,000 a year. The median value home as of 2020 was about $225,000. Well, the real estate market has been explosive since then. So I would argue it's probably closer to 275, but we'll stick with 225. And the median rent in Washington County is about $1,000 a month, which in this real estate market, I would also tell you is not realistic. Now, go back to your mind's eye and think about what you were able to get into as a young person. And now think about where those people are today. These are the early or the late, I guess, millennials and the early Gen Zers in their mid-20s who want to start a family, who want to move to a place like Washington County. They need rent that's below $1,000 a month. If they're making $40,000 a year, 30% of that is about $950 a month. Good luck finding an apartment in Washington County for $950 a month that you want your kid or your grandchild raised in. Good luck finding a mortgage in Washington County for $1,000 a month. That's about $225,000 a year at the current interest rates. God forbid they go up 0.5%. We don't have housing for these people in Washington County today. It doesn't exist. I challenge you to go to realtor.com or Zillow or whatever your preferred website is and look for a house at $225,000 that have a contingency on it that you'd want your kid to live in or you'd choose to live in yourself. They're almost impossible to find. So all I'm asking for with this vision is for the people of Washington County to give their kids and their grandkids the exact same opportunity you had 15, 25, 30, I'll be generous, and I'll stop at 30 years ago. That's all I'm asking for us to do. And I think it's completely achievable. But it's going to take all of us working together. And I lay out here exactly what I think that means. What you'll hear about as we go through the budget discussions is how I exactly plan to do that here at the county level, because I think we have the unique opportunity to set the stage for what that looks like for all of these other groups. As our mission statement says, we create the environment and it's up to everybody else to achieve their own quality of life. We create the space for this to happen, and it's going to take all these other entities to actually make that dream into reality. So what I see from the county side of things is we've been given a huge opportunity. Never mind that our kids and our grandkids and their kids will pay for generations to come, but we've got $26 million that we're getting in American Recovery Plan Act. Now is a humongous opportunity. And by the way, which we didn't need. and I advocated against with our legislators, but nonetheless, it passed, and now we have it. We have an opportunity today like we probably will never have again in my lifetime to invest now to solve problems like this that are generational. So what I'm going to propose and what you'll see and discuss in a few in a few minutes and weeks and months with the budget that's coming is that we begin to invest now over time into the human resources that are necessary to make this dream a reality, that we put the financial resources in place to begin to solve this problem today. I said a few minutes ago, our forefathers had the vision to start investing in industry in Washington County. We need to do the exact same thing so that if that's the prosperous businesses side of the equation, we need to do the exact same thing in the prosperous life side of the equation. The good news is this has been done before. We don't have to recreate the wheel. Now, if you read articles across the country, if you read the doom and gloom reports, like the Wisconsin Realtors Association, which by the way is realistic, it's just very doom and gloom. It's almost as if this is unsolvable. Well, we've done it. Post-World War II, America was exactly in the same position we're in today for different reasons, but it's happened. There's been businesses historic. Look at Kohler as just one example of a business and industry that drove an entire economy of one community, really of one county, and still does. That actually happened here in Washington County. I'll challenge you to go to the GIS website. Eric Damcott's got this beautiful, fancy series of maps and the best GIS team in I would probably argue America. But anyway, if you go onto the website and you pull up the maps and you look at an aerial photo of Washington County, zoom into downtown West Bend in 2020. Then change the aerial map to the year 2000. And look at the difference in this community in 20 years. It's breathtaking. What you see is West Bend is Kenosha or Janesville, 1/3 the size. That corridor, that river was filled with industry 25 years ago. Today it's completely gone. Doesn't exist. What you're seeing happen across America is happened right here in Washington County. And you literally don't have to go a half mile down the road to see it. You just have to reflect back to what it was like. 70 years ago, West Bend Company built homes on the south side of town just like Kohler Company did all those years ago to build Kohler. This has happened before. We're not creating something out of nothing. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just going back in time to when we were in the same position. Alternatively, and you get into what can cities and villages do, and you think about how do they help solve the problem? You know what has happened instead from 1980 until current day? We have adopted regulations and zoning codes and subdivision codes that make it impossible to replicate what happened 75 years ago. You almost literally cannot build the type of housing that we're talking about. Housing that we all had an opportunity at 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, it's almost impossible to get there today because of how we've regulated it out and our attitudes towards it. Because regulations are just a reflection of politics, which is just a reflection of our own attitudes. We don't want those people. Well, I'm here to tell you, those people are our own dang kids. So we have some changing to do, and I think Washington County has the opportunity to set the stage to allow for that change to happen in a way that people can absorb it. I won't go through the details of how every other organization has an opportunity to play, but suffice it to say, we all have a part in this whole process and achieving this dream and this vision that I'm talking about. So some immediate action steps, and you'll have more than others. This presentation is built for cities and villages, but you'll have some opportunity to consider budgetary consequences. But here's a few things that I encourage everybody to do. First, share the vision. Share this exact same story with your friends and neighbors, especially as elected officials. You have a unique avenue to do that most people don't. If you already aren't part of a local civic organization or a church group, you sure ought to be, because creating that social capital that I talked about a few minutes ago, those trusty networks and common values, that's where it happens. Not as an elected official, although that's noble work, but it actually takes those types of groups, not government, to solve these problems. The easiest thing you can do is find one kid, 18 to 25 years old, and help them develop that path to come back to Washington County and live here. I say the easiest thing because you have the networks of people, this county as good as anybody. Just like Craig Sedonico did for Jack Rettler a few years back, you can do the same thing for one kid. And if we all do that, this problem is going to solve itself. And finally, again, this is built for cities and villages. I touch on that regulatory hurdle because really they're the partners that are going to have to solve that side. County government cannot solve that. On October 7th, we're going to have an event. You've all gotten an email. All the elected officials have gotten an email inviting you to that event already. It's at the Washington County Fair Park. Doors open at 3 o'clock. I think the event starts at 3:30. We're going to have speakers from every one of these areas talking about our great community and what specifically the next generation housing has to do with it. EDWC about 6 months ago came to me after the city of Hartford and the Hartford Area Development Corporation came to them and asked them to do a housing study. They decided to ask the county to do that county-wide. So we've done that. That housing study is completed. The data points that I talked to you about a moment ago with regard to income levels and median house values are a preview of what you're going to hear. It's not good. We've done it to ourselves, but it's totally solvable. So we'll have people from every area talk about that and talk about how we can solve this problem in the next couple decades. So with that, I'm happy, Mr. Chairman, to take any questions. I thank you for the opportunity to present, and you'll certainly be hearing more about this in the coming hours, weeks, and months.
Any comments or questions from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Schulman. If I just could offer one little observation. Some of you are familiar with the Kinderberg Park development in Germantown. It was long held by the school board there. They eventually sold it off. And the first house in that new subdivision has been sold. I think of the 16 lots, there are houses, 7 houses going up there now. And the first house just sold, I'm guessing it's about 2,200 square feet, 651,000, which is $270 per square foot to build. And it's a beautiful home. It's a nice subdivision. The park is right there, but I understand exactly what you're talking about. So thank you, sir. Yes.
I mean, this is clear, but his presentation is directly relevant to the organizational chart on page 6, and then the 4 FTEs that are proposed to being added in our budget this year. So if you have any questions about those positions or what they're intended to do, I mean, I think now would be a good time to ask those questions.
Thank you. So you had mentioned participation by other groups and businesses. I haven't really heard so much, but you did mention there's going to be other partners in here. So I'm assuming throughout the
Oops, we lost his mic.
program.
We lost his mic. Oh, there. Thank you.
Sorry. You had mentioned that there's going to be other partners in each of the, I call them pillars. So we're going to be engaging business in many ways to help in those areas, because to your point, workforce and education, if they're not involved, they have to be.
Right. Yeah. So we don't have everything scripted out, first of all, but we have the outlines of what I think it's going to look like. There's a few key components on the education side. Probably about 6 years ago or so, you might be familiar with a program called Inspire. It was built to help kids develop college and career readiness plans starting in 6th grade. And as they work through high school, they're kind of learning about different industries and what they like. The United Way in Washington County started that initiative. It's never really gotten off the ground, but that's kind of that pipeline between workforce and education. So that's one component. Whether we do we step into the space of Inspire or some variation thereof, I think is yet to be determined. My conversations with superintendents is they're not convinced that that's the silver bullet, but nonetheless, there's space for us to be able to work in. You'll see a position in community development to put resources towards that. So that's one. Two, the businesses obviously have a role to play in that discussion, but they also have a role to play, just like Kohler Company did all those years ago, just like West Bend, the West Bend Company did all those years ago, to help solidify and finance whatever that housing looks like. Now, 75 years ago, we had post-World War II America and the GI Bill and VA loans helping. We had, in other instances, Kohler literally building communities for people to move into. I'm not certain it looks exactly like that 75 years later or 80 years later, but certainly one of the biggest hurdles for young people, particularly if they've gone off to college, is their debt load is out of control. I know several people in their early 20s, and you're talking tens of thousands, and in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, especially if you're a master's degree, a JD, a Juris Doctorate, or a doctorate degree. You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I mean, it's hard enough. So getting that down payment, I had the fortunate pleasure of having a VA loan, so I didn't need one personally, but most kids don't have that opportunity. So the businesses have to be involved somewhere. That could be an area. Actually providing, buying land could be an area. Building like West Bend Company did years ago could be the area. But I think the first, and the reason I went to cities and villages first, is we can't even begin that discussion unless they help us solve subdivision and zoning regulatory issues, and their attitudes completely change. So, like I said, every one of these groups.
Well, it's beyond that, right? You mentioned it earlier, is we as a community have driven where we're at. Everyone thinks of affordable housing as a dirty thing, but
Which
it's
is why
not.
you never heard me use that term, by the way.
I know that, but the reality is that's what it is.
Yeah.
Because you have to call it what it is, and people have to be willing to change. Sorry, I
No,
don't want to get off subject here, but so with each of these positions, to Ms. Ludovic's prompt, do we have, a plan for what the role is, what the intended objective is, cost benefit analysis, all those good things as we're adding, to the levy, 3 or 4 years from now? So we have to be able to articulate the value that they're bringing.
Yes. So two things. One, the chairman's point about the development in Kinderberg Park is spot on example of what you're describing. That first crack at that development was actually, I think, over 100 homes, and they weren't 250,000, but they were much closer in the $300,000 mark, and they got ran out of town. And it devolved all the way down to 16 lots. So that's one part, but the other is, as I said, we've got a thumbnail sketch, and you see an organizational chart, and you've kind of heard me articulate what I see. Think back 25 years to when EDWC was built. That's largely what I see us replicating. It won't be exactly, but it's got to be this public-private partnership, because county government can't solve this. They try that in other places, Milwaukee, and it doesn't work. So I think it takes a public-private partnership, and then there's a couple of key ingredients that have worked here really well that I think will, if we replicate, there's no reason they shouldn't work again. Deb Silsky has been super involved with our Brownfield program, and specifically our site redevelopment committee, who are exactly the people that I'm talking about, planners, administrators, who can influence and solve the zoning and subdivision issues. So having them at the table, so now we're replicating what we've done with EDWC in the past. We're replicating the Brownfield program, which has worked well. We're replicating the site redevelopment committee, and then take it one step further. And I think we need to replicate the revolving loan fund, because the reason for decades and decades and decades, we have, as a society, put money and investment into developing those prosperous businesses. We've created TIF districts, we've created grant programs, not Washington County, but others. We've created the revolving loan fund where we're investing in those industries to create jobs. We need to do exactly the same thing just for prosperous lives, which starts with, go back to your undergraduate coursework or maybe high school psychology class, Maslow's theory of needs. Housing is at the bottom. And if you don't solve that one, you have all kinds of different issues. That's what we're trying to target. So we've got the model in place. It's just how do we mold it into solving this prosperous lives issue? And I think it's a revolving loan fund type of a model to help undercut some of the costs to development for housing, just like we do for industry. I think it's maybe tackling the down payment issue with the business community incorporated somehow, creating a collaboration or a coalition with cities and villages as well on the zoning issue, as well as the workforce education issue with education and kind of the HR industry. So it's tons of moving parts and pieces, but we've done it before and we do it now, actually.
That the last piece I think is key. The education system. We've been pushing for 25 years, college, and it isn't a solution.
Yes.
And that addresses your $100,000 debt. Kids don't understand the cost benefit analysis and opportunity cost. And if they learn that in 6th grade, they'll realize they shouldn't go to college. They don't need to go to college.
And the market will be a driving force. I mean, you drive up and down, if you do drive up and down 41 as you hit like Holy Hill Road, there's, I think, 5 billboards, $17 to $25 an hour, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 signing bonuses. I mean, $20 an hour, you can't, starting teaching jobs are that, starting top jobs are that. For RNs in some places are that. Like at some point you're going to go, what am I getting a college degree for? And that doesn't even, you're not even talking about the trades or agriculture. I mean, there's all kinds of job opportunities. I think the market's going to solve some of this. The problem we're going to run into is there's not enough human bodies to solve it. So I can't solve this for the nation. I can't even solve it for the state, but we can solve it for Washington County, and we can get the heck ahead of everybody else so we can keep building prosperity here.
Just a personal observation, going back to the Kinderberg Park, and part of the obstacle that this project or this proposal is going to be up against is going to be the local community. Because Kinderberg Park, as you said, started out with many, many, many more units. And it was the local residents who objected through the village and drove down and drove down and drove down and drove down the number of houses that would be allowed because they didn't want their property values affected. They wanted those $600,000 houses built to raise their own values. And that is going to be a problem, I think, in a lot of areas where the local community is going to say, well, we don't want this, but they're going to have to accept it. And I think that there's a second challenge coming is the role of the federal government where they don't want single family houses anymore. And I think if you look at some of the legislation that is being snuck through where you restrict villages and municipalities from having and allowing single family homes to be built. Check what the governor has just done in California the last 2 days. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comment. And I think Kinderberg Park's a really good example for a lot of reasons. And one of them is you don't try to put a subdivision like this next to another subdivision that has $750,000 homes. I mean, you're asking for that outcry and you got it. And you got a new village trustee because of it. So I think these communities have to be way more strategic about, we need that type of housing, but where are we going to put that type of housing? And in that particular case, it's a wonderful example of how exactly not to do it. But it can be done. I mean, Germantown, to keep using that example, they're building a beautiful new industrial park right on 41, both sides of Holy Hill Road, just across what used to be County Highway Y, Golden Nail Road would be a wonderful spot for something like this. But you've got to have the vision, the foresight to be able to say, that's what we're doing there. And there aren't a lot of subdivisions around there that you're going to hear it from. You're never going to please 100% everybody. If you got in this business for that, you're in the wrong business. Go to a church or something. But But I think there, you're gonna get a lot less static. People are gonna be way more accepting, including in Germantown, where they historically have not been.
Any other comments? Thank you, Mr. Showman, and those who can will be at the Fair Park on October 7th.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
if you
sir.
have more comments or questions as you go through the budget, I'll sit on the other end and we can address those.
Thank you, sir. Now, we'll get back on schedule. Let's resume the budget discussion, please.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I sort of rushed through the ROD's budget, but I wanted to start with what I've been starting with for all the other standing committees really is sort of just an update on where we are in the budget process overall, and then we'll move into the budgets themselves. But first, we started the budget process in April. That's when we start developing a lot of our major assumptions and estimates and things like that. Moving into June, then we start training departments on the technical pieces, but we also issue tax levy targets. So that means we essentially give each department a tax levy number that we want them to hit. When we do that, that allows us to manage the overall budget to the tax levy that we wanted to hit when we started our planning back in April. Moving into July, departments start entering their budgets. And then in August, departments present those budgets to the county executive. At those same presentation meetings, we've also invited the standing committee chairs. We've found that over the past couple of years, that sort of helps identify those questions and concerns ahead of time that they and the committee themselves, yourselves might have. And so that was the month of August. Now in September, we're presenting the budgets to the standing committees as a discussion item. So it's a sort of a sneak peek of the county executive's budget that moving into October, the executive committee will see the entire budget as a whole at the public hearing in October 20th. After that, the budget goes to the full board on November 10th for consideration and adoption. So I'll go through each of these budgets. I'll take them in order, obviously excluding the ROD budget. This is not intended to be a line item review. I'm going to hit the big changes. I'm going to hit the technical changes in there, and then I'm going to talk somewhat about the policy, but we've got the experts here in the departments and staff that can help guide us through that discussion as well, particularly for this budget. So stop me along the way if you've got questions, but otherwise I'll just keep it moving. So moving through the packet starts with what we call a functional area summary. Essentially, that takes all of the departments that this committee oversees and kind of groups them together and presents some summary information. I didn't plan on talking about a lot of this, but I just wanted to point that out. So moving into the first budget of the packet is the Agriculture and Industrial Society. That's a fairly simple budget. That's where it's basically where we account for the grant that we provide to the AIS for the county fair. There's also a $1 of revenue that we receive for the site. If there aren't any questions, I'll move on to the next one, which is the brand new budget that we were just talking about. That's called Community Development. So essentially, from a technical side, what's happening here is the planning division from Land Resources is moved into this area. There's also another section, so that's the top financial table, which represents the personnel and related costs for building out this new department. It's got those 3 new positions in it. You'll see that there is no tax levy in the top, the community development, the brand new piece. The tax levy that's in this department is what came over from the planning side. The new piece is 100% funded at this point with ARPA dollars, American Rescue Plan Act dollars, in 22 and 23. As the notes on the page say, we will be shifting tax levy into this department incrementally to the tune of roughly 160,000 per year. That's set to happen beginning in 2024. And we're going to incrementally shift that levy in until the department itself is fully on the levy by 2027. I should also mention that we're planning to do so in a way that does not disrupt our long-term plans for tax levy. So those are the technical pieces here. There's also one more position that gets created as part of all of this. We're titling it Natural Resources Director at this point, but that is that's another piece that's in all of this ARPA funding. So the total amount of ARPA funds that we're planning to use in each year of the biennium is just under $550,000 total. And again, we're planning to phase that out as we move into 2024 through 2027. The next page has an org chart that sort of helps walk through some of the changes. But that was what I wanted to say about this budget. I'll now turn it over to Jamie or Josh or Deb and any of the other staff that's here to answer any questions you might have about this, because this is a new piece.
No comments. The county executive did want to note, or Aaron, did you touch on the overall levy change and tax rate change of the budget?
Actually, no, I'm sorry. Let me take a step back. As we're considering all of these budgets, I wanted to touch on the full levy picture for the county as a whole. So when we started the budget process, our goal was to keep the levy flat. We're happy to say that we've exceeded that goal. We're actually going to cut the tax levy by $500,000 in each year of the biennium. So a full $1 million across this budget. Thanks for pointing that out, Jamie. Josh did want me to mention that so that you can keep that in mind as in context as we're going through the rest of the budgets here. So
two things that are tied to that. One, the tax rate in 2023, we anticipate will be below $2 per thousand. We think that's the first time since probably before 1900. So it's, and Aaron in the past has, with other committees, has kind of put it in context. In 2013, that was the year before I got to the county, the tax rate was $2.83. So we'll be closer to $1.93, almost 90-cent reduction in my tenure. So that's one part. But the other part is with the tax levy being cut, now that means we're not taking that new construction, which I think all of you are familiar with, plus we're going to cut the levy on top of it. So it's kind of this like effective reduction of like close to $2.2 million. But what that means relative to community development is we've dropped the kind of the new baseline so far that as we get closer to 2027 and we're implementing the levy back in, we're still going to be significantly below that baseline that we are at today, which is good news for the taxpayer. And by kind of phasing it in, you can do two things. One, you can ease it in so that tax rates likely for the next 5 or 6 years are still going to go down while we're making this huge investment in the county. And then the other probably more important thing is to Supervisor Gallitz's point earlier, as we're going along in this biennium in particular, we can kind of feel out which one of those positions do we really need. Maybe we need to reinforce one more with additional resources and back off on another one, depending, for example, how the schools are involved or not involved. But it'll give us time with the American Recovery Plan dollars to kind of work our way through it before we start putting property tax or sales tax dollars into this department. So I think the strategy, while I'm not a huge fan of taking grant money and applying it to ongoing expense, in this particular case, we've staggered it such that And the tax cut is helping us do it in such a way where I think it's pretty fiscally conservative and responsible and will allow us to kind of feel our way through what should be an investment. And what I'll end with is, if this works, if you take across all of the county, if we only build 100 homes at $250,000 a crack, you're talking about $25 million in property value, which will overwhelmingly outweigh any costs for community development on an annual basis. So for this new department on an annual basis over time. So I think that you kind of got to look at it as you got to spend money to make money. That's totally what this is. And the grant money allows us to kind of ease in and make sure that this is working the way we wanted it to work before we get to even 2024 and start evaluating, okay, are we getting the return? Is it doing what we thought it would do? If so, we keep investing. If not, we start cutting back on that. So I just want to make that all clear.
Thanks. Questions?
I'm just gonna go into the weeds a little bit with the org chart and get granular. And it's a kind of a two-pronged question as far as the new positions, because it's a new department. What phase are you at in creating the job descriptions? And the second part of that question, because this is a new department and new, is there going to be like an evergreen component to them at all that maybe, like Josh just said, maybe there's an element of we figure we need more of this after reevaluation and such. So
Haven't started, have a meeting scheduled to talk about the positions with Deb and Aaron. Great idea. And I think that we have started talking about what the roles will be. But we have not created the positions yet.
Yeah, the only certainty I would say right now on that org chart is the community development director position, which is a department level position. And then the natural resources director position, which is also a director level position. Beyond that, I really didn't want to get too prescriptive and let the department kind of figure out what do we actually need to make this work. So the 3 additional positions below there, you see, will give enough of a budget for them to be as creative as they need to be. And of course, in this particular case, I'll be very involved in helping formulate what that actually looks like.
But I will add, Deb and her team, you saw Hannah earlier today, have been working on this and starting to ask those very questions.
thank you.
A thought just occurred to me, Executive Schulman, when you talked about, the ARPA monies and how we're using it for reoccurring expenses. Have we considered some of those dollars for, say, housing grants that, communities that we begin to work with to actually, seed or fund housing development?
We have on multiple fronts. So one of the things that'll come later, I mentioned the concept of creating a revolving loan fund for prosperous lives similar to prosperous businesses. So yes, in that regard, we're also in the process of considering and applying for a $10 million grant from the state. Which would kind of work in conjunction with the dollars that I talked about a moment ago for that revolving loan fund or potentially down payments and things of that variety. So this is a little bit of building the airplane while you're flying it. But all of those things are absolutely in the realm of possibility. I think one, we need to understand what the grant is that we're applying for. We don't want to get ourselves too involved if there's strings we don't understand. But two, the ARPA dollars are still vague enough that I'm not 100% comfortable pledging them yet, because even the Treasury Department at the federal level has given guidance, but that guidance is literally called interim final guidance. Until we get the final, or the final. I'm a little bit anxious to get too far out in front of our skis. So I think there certainly will be some kind of evergreen component, grant funded component. But again, I didn't want to be too prescriptive with that until we have some more certainty in that regard. Does that answer your question?
It does. It just seems like that's the type of monies. I know when we had monies way back when in 20, whatever, 9 or 10, when I was on the school board then, we consciously used it for things that weren't reoccurring, because guess what? At some point in time, you got to pay for it somehow.
Yes.
And it just seems based upon, that dearth of housing, if we can allocate, that would help the communities realize, look, the county is even willing to support this. I mean, it's our federal tax dollars. Let's not kid ourselves. We've all paid for this and we'll pay it for, 2, 3 generations to come. So how do we best capitalize that?
Completely agreed. And the only reason I think in this particular case, using it for some operating type of costs is this is a space we haven't been in. This gives us a chance to try it without risking property tax dollars. And if it works, we can smooth it in. And honestly, what will happen if it works the way I think it'll work is tax rates and probably the tax levy will keep going down. And the investment in this will go up, but taxpayers won't feel it that way. One way to look at all of this is, as you just noted, this is borrowing our kids and grandkids' money. We could use some of this money as their down payment for their house. So they basically have a mortgage already anyway. It's just in the form of federal tax dollars, and we're allocating it to some of their housing needs today that'll build prosperity for them in the future. So I completely agree that, and I think it's a totally legitimate concern for the board to debate. But I think we've built in enough safeguards that we can feel comfortable on the operating side, knowing some of the one-time costs are more of where we're going to have to focus our time. The other thing, if I can just say, Mr. Chairman, in that regard, is one of the pitfalls that I've seen with housing, and use the term, Supervisor Galitz, I think used the term affordable housing in the past. I think the negative connotation with that has more to do with the fact that historically that has been subsidizing people's rent payment or people's mortgage payment, which we're not talking about doing. We're talking about undercutting the infrastructure type of costs, the sunk costs, if you will, that give no value to the homeowner, at least no direct value, but are enhancements that we've built into the process, bigger setbacks, granular type of fill that's of extraordinarily high quality, things like that. That's what we're talking about paying for. So those are all good points, and it made me think of that other component that I think is an important distinction between affordable housing and next generation housing, which is not subsidized payments. It's undercutting the cost of the investment.
All right, thank you. If there are no more questions, I'll move on to the parks budget. So parks is an enterprise fund, meaning there's little to no tax levy support in there. We do show incremental amount of tax levy here. This is largely an accounting function. There's a cross charge that happens here, and it's just largely an accounting function. We've got about $50,000 of tax levy in here. One other thing to note is we're going to continue with the $120,000 in funding from the golf course, which has happened over the last several years. As I alluded to earlier, lots of cross charges and stuff in this budget, but I'm going to stick to the major changes here so that we can focus on sort of the policy and the big items. Most of the actions in the county park section of the budget. So here we're growing revenue by $140,000 in 22 and another $75,000 in 2023. There's a lot of good notes here already in the packet, so I'm not going to go through every single one. I'm hoping you had a chance to read those, but most of that growth is in like the rental type revenues for the shelters and the venues and the cabins and things like that, that you had mentioned earlier. So there's some Parks Pass revenue growth in here, about $22,000. That's based on the volume. I don't believe there's a rate increase planned for the entrance fees. That's correct? Okay, no rate increase for the entrance fees. On the expenditure side, there's some normal cost increases here related to the merit and the COLA, just personnel stuff. There's some cost in here for planned renovations to some of the facilities to improve and enhance those venues that are the revenue drivers that are in this budget. So some of the cost increases here are related to that natural resources position. So it's showing a cost increase. There's a direct revenue plug in there. So again, that's the levy neutral move. The revenue plug being the ARPA dollars used to fund that natural resources position, excuse me. In addition to this department, that position also is funded partially in golf but the majority in the land resources area. Are there any questions on the county parks budget? Jamie, did you have anything to touch on?
More detail on these revenues. And I got one question from Supervisor Gallitz in my email about our confidence level in the revenue streams that we're projecting. And I wanted to just comment that I agree that we believe that the projections are conservatively optimistic. I also am a big believer in every time we seem to set a goal and a bar for our team, we deliver. And wanted to just note that I do share that concern. I appreciate the concern that, we are being cautiously optimistic. But not only do I believe we can deliver on them, I'm also very confident in the budgeting that Logan did this year on some of the expenditures and conservatively going back and checking things. And what you may not see is the way that we are monitoring the revenues and expenditures. And so we believe it to be our job that if some of those are not trending or not tracking accordingly during the year, that you're going to see us make adjustments on the expenditure side to account for that. So by budgeting an cautiously optimistic revenue picture, that allows us to also budget some expenditures that we believe we need. So a good example, you see the garbage weekly at some of these sites, right? So we want to be able to pay for that. And so we're going, so that's kind of how that works. So there are those things that you see in that picture. We also have more, seasonal staff dollars. We have some projects that we're working on that, he can go through a list of things we'd like to do, assuming those revenue streams deliver the way we believe they can. So I just wanted to comment on that because, yes, and you'll see that too. I'm an optimist, but believe that those are well within the realm of achievable. And we were extra conservative in 2023. So we have some time there. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, I do have a couple follow-up questions, Ms. Ludovic. Thank you for that. I had brought this up previously. We had capitalized on EW. Well, I can't even get my acronym straight today.
EDWC.
We did for the golf course.
Yeah.
And I think I spoke to you after last board meeting, and we may consider using them again to update. Looking at more than just, I think it was a year or 2 year fees and trending for future strategic planning. Have we considered using, or are we using the economic corp for the parks and looking at that 5-10 year strategic plan?
Yep, we did. We have that work substantially completed. We are waiting for our meeting with the Department of the Budget and Policy Director, really to bring those trends forward in terms of what we're visioning, because, in that public policy discussion, but I expect it this winter for some of those dashboards to be released. But we have those 10-year projections, and those revenue projections are what you're seeing in these revenue numbers, even though And that's part of what's backing our confidence level of is the exercise, the analysis of the rates, the projections of what, the area rates can be, the timing needed to adjust those, the addition of I made some comments on this, but adding a shelter revenue in 23. So you're starting to see some of that build out of the total revenue picture of what the goal is. And the missing piece that isn't done yet, and this is, I think, what the holdup is from the business planning side, and it's going to be the focus this year, this off season, is the maintenance planning, is really the full analysis of what our existing assets are, and then what a potential schedule might look like, and then the discussion around, and I pick on the playground at Yar as an example, but okay, this is the playground we have. We agree we want to keep a playground here and we want it to be nice. And so it needs to be maintained and it's in the maintenance schedule versus, well, this is a playground or this is a road we have. We don't think we need a road here. So this can turn into gravel and we're not funding maintenance on it versus a road that we know we need to maintain. And you also see in the capital outlays some stuff, again, that we think is high operating improvements, but that ties, I think, to those revenue streams. And if they're delivering, we move forward with some of these projects. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it is coming. I know I've been telling you that for a long time, but we keep getting, those curveballs thrown at us. I don't know who's doing that to us.
Thank you.
All right, so the next budget is golf. So another enterprise fund. There's a budgeted increase for seasonal staff here to assist in providing some high level customer service as the activity there just continues to grow and exceed expectations. About $40,000 for additional seasonal staff.
Mostly, not necessarily more bodies. So we are hoping to take the wage rate of the hourly employee up. So I just wanted to comment that there might be some additional bodies, but mostly that's wage increases from the $10 an hour to 12 to 15.
There's also a continuing shift of $120,000 to the parks budget. As mentioned, that's budgeted in the other financing uses line. Some revenue increases obviously budgeted here. That's related to both volume and moderate increase to the rates. Looking at the rate sheet, generally speaking, the rate increase was for 18 hole rounds. The increase was about $1. Do you have anything to say about that? Or I'd imagine that was.
Yes, I do. So I just want to point out, if you look at the 2021 estimated actual, $200,000 of revenue above the budget, that we should fire the budget director for that one. That was, no, I'm just kidding. That was off. So we knew when we budgeted 2021 that we did not budget COVID. Remember, we had COVID in 2020 and we had a strategic rate increase in 2020 that coincided with our best year ever. So we had those numbers in 2020 as well. And so now you're seeing it in 2021. So in 2022, we have made a decision that some of that revenue is going to be sustainable based on that strategic rate increase and that pricing, probably still not quite enough. The actual rates are going to be set when we complete the full rate analysis at the end of the year with what the surrounding courses are doing. We do that after this season. And then we're planning to come back to you with the full dashboard report on the 2021 season, where the rates are going to shake out. We're going to do the economic development study again and have that conversation. And you'll be, I think you're going to be really happy with seeing how some of these initiatives are. And if you remember the last one, the fitting service we started offering, are tracking and playing, but it shows up here and it made this budget really easy. Craig and Dave did a great job. So I just wanted to point that out, and that, yeah, the rates you see here are estimates for this time of the season that usually we don't exceed them. I know they don't want to necessarily increase rates, and this will be a discussion for you to have, but at the same time, the industry is, because wages are going up and chemicals are going up and expenses are going up. And so you fall further and further behind the rates if you don't move on the rates. So it's kind of that analysis that we're doing, and he knows, because I'm like, well, how much are they charging? Oh, yeah, they're increasing rates, so we're having that conversation, and we continue to usually post season. Another thing to note, this is not really related to the budget, but a conversation is we will need to change how we're staffing the food and beverage operation out there. We just got notice that our contractor is retiring and has agreed to end out the season out there, but that's going to be a discussion, or we're going to probably go out for a new contractor in hopes that we can find someone. But the comments from our existing contractor were that staffing agencies are not, they're having a lot of trouble. They're not bidding on this type of stuff. So that might be another question that comes up as part of this budget. And some policy questions for this committee to consider potentially. So.
All right.
Sorry, I'm thinking ahead. Does that include envisioning in-house if we don't get, response to an RFP for a contract vendor?
So we're going to attempt the contract vendor because right now the county has a no tip policy for county employees. And that is a kind of a hurdle for those positions. So first, we're going to attempt a new contractor. If we fail at that, then the answer to that question is yes, that's the backup plan.
All right, thank you. The next budget is land information. So the land information office, essentially, they get their revenue in a similar manner to the Register of Deeds. It's an internal service fund. The dollars that they receive are used to fund activities identified in the land information plan. It's important to note that this does not fund personnel. Some counties do that. We are not one of them. We're not looking to get hooked on this funding source for ongoing operations. It funds the projects only. The numbers sort of speak for themselves. I did not have a lot of information to add to this one, but we do have Eric here if there are questions.
Thank you. I did have a question on the admin, and it seems the additional FTE add, and it seems the preponderance of it is to address enforcement for violators of entering the park system, and we're expecting or anticipating that growth. That seems to be a Band-Aid to me versus a root cause. Are we looking at what's the root cause for the violations and then enforcement? Because if we can curb that, then do we need, FTE to increase to manage that collection of enforcement fees?
I'm going to ask Deb Silsky. Deb, were you listening to that question?
Yeah, if I could clarify, I was actually talking about land information, but I'm moving into land
think I jumped
resources,
out.
I think.
Yeah,
is
but
where-
that's a
jumped
good
ahead.
question. And Deb, if you want to, he's asking, did you hear the question? Yes. Just because she had really worked on that position and putting that together, and it's related to the land resources move that's in the budget that you see coming up. So I'm just going to ask her to very briefly answer that question.
Yeah. So it's not our goal to increase our revenues of our park violations. We have had ongoing conversations since we started the entrance fee on how we can better signage and provide education information to the citizens so that they're fully informed that there is a fee for our park system. But we've also had improvements to the process of doing the violations. And that has actually increased the number of violations and increased the workload in that area. But this position is not just for that. It's also for the overall assistance with the park system and all the improvements that they're doing. It's that administrative component that has kind of been missing from our park system, because the bulk of the office staff has really been focused in on the land resources, the land use component, and the permitting. And with the next gen permitting process kind of shifting to the land use inspectors, we will be able to focus in on assisting the parks. We had a summer intern this year that assisted the parks almost exclusively in developing those long-term projections that Jamie had alluded to, that started with conversations in the EDWC. And that has been extremely helpful for the park system. And this position would also be assisting the parks in those types of projects as well.
Thank you. Really, my comments on land resources were around those changes. I was going to ask Deb to come up and present those changes, and so that was what I had to say on land resources, unless there are any other questions on that budget. The next one was Register of Deeds, which we've already covered. So I will move into the UW extension budget. So on the expenditure side, there are some reduced personnel costs there. We shifted support staff over to basically to contracted staff, the 136 contract. That resulted in a net savings of roughly $7,000 to $8,000 because we had obviously, we're no longer paying this person, but we had a contract increase because of the shift. We also had some increase to the contract related to there's a shift to a regionalized agriculture educator model that's being done with Sheboygan, Ozaki. Is it Ann Fond du Lac? Yes, and Fond du Lac as well. That cost is about $11,000. But the big one here is in interdepartmental charges. With the new arrangement with the Fair Park, we used to pay them, essentially we used to pay them rent for using the space. We're no longer doing that as a result of the new agreement. So that results in a $62,000 tax levy savings. So that's the main reason why you see that tax levy reduction in 2022. There are no revenues in this budget. And that concludes my presentation, unless there are questions on this one.
Yes, sir. I guess this question really is not that directed so much to the budget. But Cindy, can you just give us a quick update on the filling of Megan Fisher's position, just so the committee knows what's happening with that? Then we should be back to full staffing. Is that correct?
No, because Kelly, our food wise coordinator, also resigned. That position probably won't be filled until December, January.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for the budget presentation. Thank you very much. That takes us to a presentation on a municipal separate stormwater system permitting. Mr. Sebo is back.
I want to thank everybody for staying. Exciting time. So I did want to give a presentation about our county's municipal separate storm sewer systems permit. It's a part of a WPDS permit from the DNR. WPDS stands for Wisconsin Pollution Discharge Elimination System. over the years, I've been giving snippets into the department report where we sit with the MS4 permit. But also a requirement of the MS4 is that I actually educate the elected officials about stormwater management and what's required in this permit. So this kind of gets the check boxes. Plus it's been something I've wanting to do for several months now, so. All right, so what is an MS4 permit? Originally it started out of the 1972 Clean Water Act. It's basically a federal rule that the state DNR adopted, saying we'll administer this at a local level rather than the federal agency, federal EPA administering this. That started back in, obviously, the Clean Water Act was adopted in 72. But it really kind of looked at point sources, and those point sources, they were only looking at sewage treatment plants. A sewage treatment plant, you got a pipe going into the water. That's definitely a pollution source, paper mills, etc. The Clean Water Act was revised in '87, and it actually brought in stormwater management. So you have large stormwater systems in cities and villages, and Milwaukee has a main sewer treatment stormwater system. But it's actually those large pipes from the big cities. And that's what they were really looking at back in 1987, is controlling the larger cities. And then also they included some of the agricultural livestock operations, the large farms. In NR 216, in 1994, that quota was created, and it talked about two different phasings of bringing in the MS4 permit. Back in 1994, it was communities that were over 50,000, and that was like the Milwaukee's and the Chicago's and stuff, and they had that permit. 2004, it actually started with communities and areas, and I'll get into why I say areas, with a population density of 1,000 or more people per square mile, and they actually used the census to determine that. It also kind of kicked in the construction sites. So you have a construction site that's under construction, you have to make sure you implement those control practices to kind of control that. Talk about that again. Back in 2004, actually the department hit Washington County, and it was the city of Hartford, West Bend, and the village of Germantown actually had to get their first permit. Phase 2 continued, and in 2014, it actually brought all the other communities, all the other villages in Washington County, with the exception of the village of Newburgh. The population isn't as large. Plus, it kind of covers kind of two different counties, so their villages kind of split with the census and the census box. So that's actually just a picture of the permit. It's just letters saying they were covered. We have a municipal separate permit. But there's a whole lot of requirements that go into that. I mentioned all the communities, and this kind of a map of all the communities. It's kind of interesting on this map that if you look at the town of Barton has urbanized areas, the town of Trenton has urbanized areas, and also the town of Hope has urbanized areas. Those were not required to have an MS4 permit. I'm not exactly sure. I don't write the rules to that stage, but the town of West Bend and the town of Hartford had to get a permit, along with all the other villages. And this map is also the urbanized area. So if village of Richfield has to have a permit, you only need to focus in on what's highlighted on the map. So we don't have to cover the entire village. It's kind of that urbanized. So these are all the permit requirements. There's 6 different requirements, and I'll touch on those in a little more detail as we go through. Public education outreach. Back when this all started, it was really looked at land conservation office to really kind of do this, because we're always educating on runoff control, stormwater management. We've been doing, as long as I started in '88, we've been doing stormwater and construction site erosion control, also educating the farmers on runoff control and manure management. So it just kind of fit the whole practice with the whole permit staying in the land conservation end. We continue to do public education outreach. The top right picture is a contractors workshop we had a couple years ago. The bottom center is something we just did at the fairgrounds, partnered with other municipalities, and actually had a booth to talk to everybody that came through the fairgrounds, play down and talk a little bit of interest about stormwater management, why we do that. We partner with the Southeast Wisconsin Watershed Trust, and that's the bottom right picture. That sparkles the water spaniel, talks about picking up the dog waste, dog waste, other kind of pollution control piece of it. Another component is public involvement. How do we get the public involved actually understanding stormwater, understanding pollution control. One of that is the storm drain stenciling. Dump no waste into a storm drain, all goes to the stream. Even on the previous picture with the fair park, or the fairground stand that we had Nemo. Nemo was kind of our theme. All drains lead to the ocean, and it really does, no matter whether you have flush the toilet here in the building, or you go out and you dump in the storm sewer inlet that's on the street, everything ends up going to the river system, like Michigan, on down to the ocean. So it's all kind of connected. So we're always looking for ways, more ways to public involved, and how they can help in that stormwater management understanding. We sell rain barrels for a tree program. We always look at a tree program as an educational tool that we use to educate the general public. We sell rain barrels, we sell compost bins. That all helps in that water quality component. Illicit discharge and detection is another one. I always say that this whole program doesn't really fit with a county system. It definitely fits with cities and villages. You know, they have the storm sewer inlets, they have the whole network of underground piping. There's a lot of illegal connections. There's just old developments in downtown areas that it's like, all right, we got a pipe that's going out. Oh, here's a pipe in the ground. We'll just connect to that, and that might go to the stream rather than the wastewater treatment plant. So it's a matter of finding those. We do have some storm sewer inlets and stuff on our county roads, so we have to look at those. It doesn't actually meet the requirements of the required sites that we have to look at, because it's discharge of was it 50 acres of watershed or larger that would go into some of these pipes. We just don't have that on our county streets. Most of this we actually look at as the intermittent. If there was an accident on a highway, storm sewer inlet, or let's say they broke a fuel tank on a semi, that either got into the road ditch or a storm sewer inlet on some of our county highways. It's that intermittent kind of episodic event where illicit discharge would actually hit. And we definitely report things to the DNR spills hotline. A lot of the sheriff's department, anybody who's on an accident also does that reporting. So construction site and pollution control, I mentioned even from when I started in '88, we're actually working under a land division code that talked about construction site pollution control. Now we have our own ordinance for the county, and we actually administer that ordinance in most of our municipalities, with just the exception of a few. So it is true that erosion rates are 10 times higher on a construction site than cropland. You might say, why is that the case? Well, you look at when most construction happens, it's done in the middle of the summer. You take off that topsoil. The topsoil has that root structure. It has that structure to be able to hold the organics and everything else in there. In a construction site, they take that away. You're left with the clays, the silts, and the sands exposed. Plus also, when do we get our heaviest rainstorms? In the summertime, the thunderstorms. So that's why erosion rates are 10 times higher. And we get a lot of questions from contractors and developers. And so why do we have to do that? And the farmer doesn't have to do anything, and he's plowing up the things in the fall. So it's just that rain time intensity. And it is true, an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. And we kind of say that because this is the stages of erosion control, or the stages of erosion is you have the raindrop hitting that soil surface, making that impact, basically dislodging, breaking up the soil particles that are there. Then it goes to transport. As you get more rain, it starts moving down the landscape and then deposits in our lakes and streams. And it is most cost effective to control at the site, at the point of impact. So minimize the disturbance, minimize the area that's the time a site is open, and try to get covered as soon as possible. Post-construction stormwater management. So that is kind of the after effect after the development is in, making sure that people downstream don't see more water in a storm event than what they've had previously. And that's kind of the reason we do stormwater ponds, is kind of create that sponge effect, try to do infiltration, try to reintroduce the water back into the ground. As development occurs, you definitely see more impervious area. So we want to try to get that water back in into our aquifer. So even in, if you look at 1.5 inches of rain on 1 acre, if that 1 acre was fully paved compared to a grass field or a farm field, the runoff from that 1 acre would fill a 10 by 10 room, 24 feet tall, fully paved site. Compared to a grass field, it would only be a foot tall, basically up to your knees, or just a little bit below your knee. So this is an old study that was done decades ago in the eastern part of the country. They looked at natural watersheds where they just had houses and old developments and stuff. They said, okay, if you have a watershed that's 5% or less impervious, so 5% of an entire landscape is impervious with houses and buildings and industries and stuff like that. And as that watershed starts to change and starts to develop more and more into that 6 to 10%, you actually start to see more of that runoff coming to a stream, starting to cause erosion and scouring. The top picture is Honeycorn, Kewaskum. You look at the watershed above that, that's more of a rural area, but that's an impact that happens, from the development that happened in Kewaskum and further north in Campbellsport and stuff. And then once you get into the 25% impervious in a watershed, basically the streams are dead, meaning that you lost the natural infiltration, you lost the natural stream or spring flows that go into the stream to keep it active. That's gone, streams dry up more, and then all of a sudden when you get a rainstorm event, it's just a flash flood, flash move. And even downtown Milwaukee, they were seeing such flashing that it's like, all right, we just got to pave these streams. We can't hold them in place anymore. So we're just going to concrete them, get the water through as fast as possible. Obviously, nothing can live in that, no stream, no fish, organisms or anything else. Another large component of this, and this is probably the biggest one, is the pollution prevention. We work with the highway department. They've been doing a great job in their own budget saying, hey, we need to reduce our salt that we put on the roads. How can we do that? That's a cost savings. They do a lot of brine rather than regular, rock salt and stuff like that. Huge savings on them. It's more efficient, time saving. We have to look and even how they manage the yards, basically both of the highway facility here and Slinger, making sure that things are managed underneath roofs. So you don't have, when you have a rainfall, trucks are sitting outside dripping oil, whatever the case might be, that gets washed off. All their maintenance and stuff is done on the roof. And then we even look at their storage yard. The bottom left picture is actually right across the road by the fuel island. You can definitely see the pile of blacktop that they had, crushed blacktop. When it rains, that kind of has that slow discharge and stuff coming out of there. So it's all a part about managing the sites that we have, the dump facilities, and then also the roads. Stormwater comes off the roads into the road ditch or storm sewer inlets, like I talked before. That's all part of the pollution prevention that I'll get into a little bit more detail too. So like I mentioned, the county properties, because we've been so active in 30 years of stormwater management, we've also been very active in the development of the county grounds, specifically even in our parks, and implementing stormwater practices. Nobody knows there's a huge, what we call a regional detention basin behind the Samaritan, and that's the picture on the right. We built that. We actually got a grant from the DNR to build that, and that takes care of the entire property of all the county courthouse, the PAC and everything else. And that pond itself can show it as an 80% pollution reduction in the stormwater runoff hitting it. So it was a great practice to implement years ago, and it's really kind of saving us now as we get into some of the modeling and stuff that we have to do. So I talked about good housekeeping, winter road maintenance, road salt reductions, and the modeling. So part of the requirement is that we have to actually model all the urbanized area that Washington County owns. So it's our streets, it's our county courthouse campus, our highway shops. And in that, we actually have to meet the old standard used to be, this is back 10 years ago, you had to have a 20 and 40% reduction in phosphorus and sediment. Now we actually have to meet the TMDL. It's a total maximum daily load that covers the Rock River, which is 40% of the western side of the county, and the Milwaukee River, which is the other 60% of the east side of the county. The limits in the TMDL and the Rock, they're showing that we need to have reductions of 40 to 60%. So it's above the 40% they even had. In the Milwaukee, there's areas and little watershed areas that the limits are at 80% reduction. And it's just really kind of tough to get that on a road that goes through a municipality alongside a city, and it's our responsibility to have that kind of control. So we're working through the modeling and stuff and seeing how we can do that. There might be opportunities as highways are developed to actually widen the road ditch, make them more flatter, to actually do that stormwater control, pollution reduction kind of things in the management of, and then the design of the roads. Yep.
It's just a question with our projected campus future plan that retention pond.
Yep.
That you spoke to. Will that, is that size to handle any type of new impervious surface on our footprint?
So when we designed that pond, we actually figured there would be additional impervious areas that are added. We'd have to go back every time a new addition comes in, we have to go back into the original design and original model. And the next challenge is some of the rainstorms that we design things off have changed. So there are different inputs that go in to everything, but we'll go back in and reevaluate it to make sure we are hitting things, or there might be areas, small areas, even the parking lot that came off of the upper parking lot over here. There's an old stormwater basin that's kind of their infiltration area that needs maintenance. Talk to Logan again. I'll have to hit him on that one again, but maintaining that one. Yeah, we'll have to reevaluate that as we go through. Plus, it's also being talked about maybe getting rid of the PAC and selling that land, so we actually then save some on what goes down that way. So, yep. So again, I talked about the TMDL. So really water TMDLs, so you have a better understanding. It's the total amount of pollutants a water body can receive and still meet water quality standards. So that's kind of gets back to the Clean Water Act, swimmable, fishable. And how do they determine that? It's actually a load allocation. So they determine kind of what the landscape is now, how much runoff is coming from that, what future development can do. And then they say plus a little margin of safety. And this is your number. This is your % reduction of what a current runoff is and what you have to do to be able to meet that TMDL. So like I said, for Washington County, 40% is in the rock. So by October 31st of 2021, we have to show we're either in compliance or we have to develop a plan of how we're going to be in compliance. So that data is still coming yet, but we actually submitted that analysis and the modeling a couple months ago, and a week and a half ago, we got the letter from DNR saying we achieved compliance at the TMDL. We're good with the rock. So we still got a lot more modeling and stuff to do in the Milwaukee River side. That's not due until March 31st. So hopefully our modeling and stuff we can show, or we have to develop a plan of how we're going to meet that in the next kind of permit term in the next 5 years. And that might be, again, sitting down with Highway Commissioner or the Public Works Director and saying, okay, what's your next road developments in this area? How can we either maybe acquire more right of way or change the design of some of the road ditches to try to get that reduction in order to meet the TMDL limits. And this is, I believe, the last or close to the last slide. So by March 31st of each year, this is the annual ongoing thing. We have to do an annual report demonstrating compliance with all the permit requirements. So there's also a lot of tracking of everything that we do, what we did throughout the year. We also do have to do an annual evaluation of the program. How are we doing? Where can we make improvements? And we also have to all do that with trying to do as limited time and limited staff involvement into this permit as possible. You know, you just seen the budget. I mean, this took a lot of work in the last couple of years because we just got a new permit that had all these TMDL limits. So we had to go back and do all this modeling, do that all with existing staff. So if your car breaks down and you're a mechanic, you start working on your car and you don't maybe cut the grass this week and it grows a little longer. So we got to get back in and cutting the grass and other projects. But yet this is a big requirement, and DNR comes back and does audits on this program. So I don't want to be pulled into a enforcement meeting if I don't have to. And then again, provide means for the public to review and comment. So we do have permit information. We have all our plans and everything else on the county website underneath the land division piece of it. Again, I mentioned about educating the public officials and stuff. So a little checkbox for today. So that's his reason. So that's all I have.
But he nailed it at the end with the comments about, so the purpose of this entire presentation is to show you a little bit of the nuts and bolts of the workload that these, sometimes these mandates or the legislation that comes down on clean water or the changing permit requirements lands on this team and they just deal with it. And so I think having a general understanding of the types of work that is required and what we're required to do on a day-to-day basis is helpful when you're talking about things at a higher level of what that we're lucky to have Paul. We're lucky to have Paul and his team that have the level of experience they have in this area because they are meeting these requirements and it just often goes just kind of unnoticed and unappreciated. So thank you, Paul. Thank Paul Backus for us. on the work that you guys are doing on this, and we do appreciate that.
I mean, it even helps to have Scott Schmidt, I mean, who started in the Planning
Mhm.
and Parks Department as an engineer. His previous work is worked for a developer doing subdivision plans and doing stormwater management. So he definitely understands that at the ground phase as he's moving up and now looking at the highway saying, all right, how can we reduce salt? We know that has an impact. And he was initially, when working in the planning department, Planning and Parks Department, doing some of this permit compliance work and stuff too. So he definitely understands that, which is great. So.
Thank you, Paul. Lots of paperwork.
And time.
Yes, Mr. Gallitz.
Quick follow-up. So you hit it right on the head. So your team is dialed in. I'm just curious, when you have urban settings, because new construction, new residential, it's all tied in, but what about urban settings? And if they have quality issues, is there any advice that, say there's a vacant dilapidated lot that is turned into a rain garden or whatever they call it? I mean, are you working with the local cities and villages that might have urban density centers where they have water quality problems?
No, we do not. We deal in the unincorporated areas. So even when you look at like the town of West Bend and town of Hartford, when they had to do their modeling, they went back to some of the subdivisions that we were regulating and overseeing, 20, 30 years ago, and had stormwater basins. So I mean, that's kind of saving their modeling, in their efforts. But yeah, we don't have that kind of connections with the cities and villages to really kind of get into, but that also comes in. I mean, you look at where the museum is downtown, that would have been a great place for a regional detention basin, but it's also very valuable land. So you kind of get in this balance act of what can fit and what you can do. But, yep.
Thank you. Now, the last item for discussion this morning is regarding a special snowmobile grant. Ms. Silsky will provide the overview. I'll just preface this with this unfortunate situation has come up and caused by our error, and now we need to fix it. Deb?
So, so the department is responsible for applying for some pass-through funds from the DNR to the snowmobile clubs. They are determined by the per mile groomed trail throughout the county, and you have heavy snow events, seasons, we could reach a threshold, surpass that threshold, and then be eligible for some supplemental funding. So that happened this last year. It's unfortunate that the department did not. We missed that deadline to apply for those supplemental funds. We do have, since that happening, we have worked with the DNR to make sure that we have detailed procedures in place for the future, so we know that this should not happen again. And going back to your question about that administrative position, that would also serve as a backup for our snowmobile program.
Thank you, Deb. Mr. Zeri, we thank your patience being with us here all this morning. We got lots of little things to take care of. But what we need today is a consensus for drafting a resolution involving a grant from the county to provide reimbursement for those expenses. There will likely be more questions and details that will come out during the discussion on the resolution, so we'll have our questions at that point in time. Now, I understand this, the figure is going to be somewhere around $53,000, give or take a little at this time. What we need is a consensus vote to move this forward for the staff to draft up the resolution, which we'll take at the next meeting, which will eventually get up to the board. I guess the timing would have us at the November meeting for full board action. So do we have consensus on this? All those in favor say aye. Anybody opposed? All right, very good. Deb, I assume your staff or someone will work on drawing up this resolution. Mr. Gallus, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused. Where would it sounds like we're trying to come up with some funds that would offset what was potentially lost in the special pass-through. So where's that coming from? I guess I missed that. Is that what the intent is consensus?
transfer.
But we would we have been guaranteed the funds?
So we have reason to believe, and I would ask, and I will ask, Mr. Zier, am I saying that right? If he's willing to make a few comments just to, educate us a little bit about that. But at the same time, yes, we have reason to believe that they would have received the money if we would have applied. We're kind of dialing in on, what potentially that figure might be and what would be, reasonably acceptable. And so I'd ask if he wants to have any comments on that, just so it's helpful to the staff as well as we're preparing that resolution.
Good morning. The snowmobile program is a two-step grant program through the state. We have a normal yearly grant per mile. And then in seasons like last winter, there is a grant that if the snowmobile clubs put out an exceptional amount of money and do a lot of trail maintenance through grooming, there is another grant available. I reminded the Parks Department twice so that they didn't miss the deadline. They did miss the deadline. And they have graciously, we have come to an agreement to settle the matter, and that's why we're here today. Any questions?
Do you have in your mind, I know you're sort of the representative of the snowmobile club, an amount that you would find acceptable?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of $53,000.
Thank you, Mr. Zeri. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I believe we did have a consensus vote on this. Is that correct? All right. So anyway, the staff will proceed with developing a resolution for this. It will carry on. We'll have action on at our October meeting. I believe there's nothing else here this morning. Thank you for putting up with this for 2.5 or over 2 hours. Our next regularly scheduled meeting will be at 7:30 a.m. on Thursday, October 28th.